They called her barren behind polished smiles and closed doors, as if her body were the punchline of a joke nobody bothered to whisper quietly. But the most dangerous man in Seoul wasn't looking for a womb. He was looking for a reason to still have a heart. If you believe love was never meant to be measured by a woman's womb, hit like and subscribe right now. Only the advisor begs of the world, the gossips, the bloodline obsessed, the ones who'd rather crown a fertile stock than a real heart, would scroll past without smashing that button. Don't be like Beck. Kang Min-jae had buried 3 men that year, and none of them by choice. Not his choice, anyway. The choice belonged to whoever kept testing how far his patience stretched before it snapped like old rope. Seoul's underworld ran on rumors the way engines ran on gasoline. And this year's favorite rumor wasn't about turf or money. It was about his bloodline, or the humiliating lack of one. "You are 36, Advisor Beck reminded him for what felt like the 400th time, seated across a boardroom table polished to a mirror shine, as if reflecting 6 anxious old faces back at themselves was somehow comforting. Every year without an heir is a year rivals sharpen their knives a little slower, a little more patiently. They are in no rush, Minjae-nim. They know time will do the work for them. Then I suppose I should thank them for their patience, Minjae said, not looking up from the shipping manifest in his hands. Very considerate of my enemies. Bake's mustache twitched, the closest thing the man had to an emotional range. The Yoon family has offered their eldest daughter, impeccable bloodline, fertile stock, by all accounts. Fertile stock? Minjae finally looked up. You're describing a woman like she's a prized cow at auction. I'm describing an asset, which is what marriage is in our world. Then find yourself a wife, Beck. I'm not in the market. The old man's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. He didn't need to. The silence in the room said it plainly enough. The empire is bigger than your preferences. Min-jae had heard that sentence in 100 different accents over the years, from his father, from his father's advisors, from strangers who thought proximity to power gave them permission to comment on his personal life, like villagers gossiping over a fence. He'd learned to let it slide off him the way rain slides off good leather, mostly. What none of them knew, what none of them needed to know, was that Min-jae wasn't avoiding marriage out of stubbornness. He was avoiding it out of memory. His mother had died trying to give his father a second child, a fact buried so deep in medical records and family silence that even Min-jae had only understood the full shape of it in fragments growing up. Love and his family had a body count. He wasn't eager to add to it. So when his assistant mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the charity gala fundraiser needed a new coordinator because the last one had quit due to creative differences, Code 4 couldn't handle the passive-aggressive board members. Min-jae approved the replacement without reading her file, a mistake he would spend the rest of the year being grateful for. 3,000 miles and one ocean away, and a life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Amara had learned to read a room before she even stepped into it. She'd learned it in waiting rooms, mostly. Fluorescent lighting, pamphlets with titles too gentle for what they described. Doctors who softened bad news the way people soften bad meat, seasoning it heavily so you wouldn't notice how little substance was actually there. Diminished ovarian reserve. That was the polite version. The version whispered at church potlucks and family reunions was shorter and crueler. Barren. A single word, sharpened over years of gossip until it could cut through skin without anyone lifting a finger. She'd stopped correcting people a long time ago. What was the point? Explaining medical nuance to someone who'd already decided you were less than was like arguing physics with a brick wall. The wall wasn't going to suddenly understand gravity, and you just end up with a headache. So when the opportunity came to coordinate a charity gala in Seoul, paid handsomely, far from home, far from anyone who knew her name or her diagnosis, Amara took it the way a drowning woman takes a rope. No questions asked, no baggage explained. She didn't expect the mysterious, silent benefactor funding half the charity's programs to notice her at all, let alone linger in doorways pretending to care about spreadsheet formatting. She definitely didn't expect to notice him back. Reflection for the comments. If a stranger's rumor could end your chance at love before it even started, would you still choose to open your heart, knowing the world was already choosing your ending for you? Drop your honest answer below. Hit subscribe if you believe a woman's worth was never meant to be measured by her womb. Only the whisperers, the gossips, and the advisor becks of the world will scroll past without hitting that button. The Seoul Grand Ballroom smelled like money and forced politeness, an expensive combination Amara had come to learn that could disguise almost anything. Bad wine, worse people, even a mafia boss apparently, if he wore his tailored suit well enough and kept his mouth shut in the right rooms. She hadn't clocked Kang Min-jae as dangerous the first week. Mysterious, sure. Quiet, definitely. The kind of man who paid for everything and asked for nothing in return, which in Amara's experience usually meant one of two things. Either he was a saint, or he was keeping receipts for something much bigger than a gala. She was betting on the receipts. "You're doing that thing again," she said one evening, catching him lingering by the auction table, watching her organize centerpiece arrangements with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb. "What thing?" "Standing near me like you're supervising, when we both know you don't care about seating charts." Min Jae allowed himself the smallest smile, the kind he usually reserved for closing deals that made other men weep. "Maybe I care about efficiency." "Maybe," Amara said, not looking up from her clipboard. "You just like watching a woman work who isn't terrified of you." That landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Min Jae had spent a decade cultivating an aura specifically designed to make grown men reconsider their life choices with one look. And here was this woman, this stranger from a country that didn't even know his name, completely unbothered, correcting his flower arrangements like he was an intern who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. He found he didn't hate it. Their conversations became a habit neither of them named out loud. "A coffee here." A late walk along the Han River there, where Amara marveled at the skyline like a woman still deciding whether the world could be trusted to be beautiful without punishing her for noticing. "You don't talk about home," Min Jae said one night, watching city lights ripple across the water like scattered confetti no one had bothered to clean up. "Not much to say." Amara's voice went carefully flat, the tone of someone who'd rehearsed deflection until it sounded like truth. "Home's complicated. Everyone's home is complicated. That's not an answer." She glanced at him sideways. "You don't talk about your business. I don't talk about mine. Seems fair." "Touché." He almost laughed. Almost. What Amara didn't say, what she'd trained herself not to say, the way some people train themselves not to touch a stove twice, was that home was a place where women whispered about her body like it was public property up for review, where Baron followed her the way a shadow follows a body, attached, silent, impossible to outrun without amputating the whole leg. She'd come to Seoul to be a person again, not a diagnosis, not a cautionary tale mothers use to scare their sons away from difficult women. Just Amara, competent, funny, exhausted in all the normal ways, and blessedly, gloriously unknown. Min Jae, for his part, wasn't offering full disclosure either. He hadn't mentioned the 6 advisors currently drafting a shortlist of acceptable brides like they were building a spreadsheet of livestock. He hadn't mentioned the whispers of rival families sharpening knives, patient as vultures circling a man who refused to die on schedule. Some truths, they'd both silently agreed, were better left in the water they'd both learned to walk carefully around. It was during the 3rd week, after she caught him fixing a jammed projector with the calm precision of a man who'd once definitely handled things far more explosive, that Amara made the mistake of actually laughing. Not the polite, professional laugh she reserved for donors and board members. The real one. Loud, unguarded, the kind that made her hunch slightly, hand over her mouth like she was trying to catch it before it escaped and gave something away. Min Jae stared at her like she'd solved an equation he'd spent years failing. "What?" she asked, catching her breath. "Nothing," he said, which was, technically, the second lie he'd told her that month. The first being that he only funded the charity for tax purposes. He realized with the particular horror of a man who prided himself on control, in real and immediate danger of falling in love with a woman his empire would call a liability before they'd even bother learning her name. Seoul had a way of keeping secrets exactly as long as it found them useful, and no longer. Min Jae had known this his whole life. He'd built an empire on the principle. What he hadn't accounted for was how quickly that principle would turn against him the moment his own heart became the story worth selling. It started small, the kind of small that always precedes catastrophic. A photograph, grainy, taken from across the street outside a noodle shop Min Jae had foolishly assumed was too unremarkable for anyone to watch. In it, he was laughing. actually laughing, head tilted back, guard down, at something Amara had said. She stood close to him, close enough that anyone with eyes and an agenda could draw their own conclusions. By the time the photo reached Advisor Beck's desk, it had already been through 4 sets of hands, each one adding their own flavor of speculation, like gossip was a soup everyone insisted on seasoning. An American, Beck said, sliding the photograph across the boardroom table like it was evidence in a trial nobody had asked him to preside over. A charity worker. No family standing, no bloodline to speak of. He paused, letting the next words drop like stones into still water. And, if the rumors are accurate, barren. The word landed in the room the way slurs always land in rooms full of powerful men pretending to be dignified. Quietly devastating, dressed up as concern. Min Jae didn't blink. Careful, Beck. You're describing a human being like she's a defective product. I'm describing a liability. Beck's voice sharpened. Do you understand what this looks like to our rivals? The Kang Empire's heir, chasing a woman who by every account cannot give you an heir at all? You're not falling in love, Min Jae. You're handing our enemies a headline. Then let them write it. Min Jae stood, his chair scraping against marble with a finality that made 2 of the older advisors flinch. I built this empire without needing anyone's permission for a single decision I've made. I'm not about to start asking for it now, especially not about who I choose to care for. It should have ended there. Dramatic exit, slammed door, the works. The kind of scene that would have made for a satisfying end to the meeting if Beck weren't the sort of man who always kept one more card up his sleeve, tucked next to his heart where warmth was supposed to be. Rival houses are already circling, Beck said quietly, and something about the stillness in his voice made even Min Jae pause at the door. They smell weakness the way sharks smell blood in water, Min Jae Nim. A leader with no clear heir invites war. If you insist on this woman, you're not just choosing love, you're choosing a war you may not survive. And you certainly won't be the only one paying for it. Min Jae didn't answer. He didn't need to. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, something in his chest, small, foreign, embarrassingly fragile, tightened like a fist around a truth he wasn't ready to name out loud. Amara found out the way most inconvenient truths arrive. Badly timed, secondhand, and delivered by someone who clearly relished being the messenger. His name was Seo, a lieutenant from a rival house, smiling at her over cocktails at a gala like he'd been waiting all evening for the right moment to ruin her night. You know who funds your little charity, don't you? He asked, swirling his drink with theatrical patience. The real business he's in? Amara's stomach dropped, but her face stayed composed, a skill she'd perfected over years of hearing worse things said with worse intentions. Enlighten me. Kangmin J doesn't fund charities out of kindness, sweetheart. He funds them because it looks good on paper. And you, he tilted his glass toward her like a toast to something cruel. You're about to become a very expensive PR problem. The barren foreigner story writes itself. Rivals love a scandal that doesn't require bullets. Easier to bury a reputation than a body. Amara had survived whispers before. She'd survived men who treated her diagnosis like a bargaining chip. Women who treated her body like a cautionary tale told at dinner parties. But this, being weaponized against a man she'd started, foolishly, dangerously, to care for. This was a new kind of ugly. And ugly, she was learning. Always arrived wearing a well-tailored suit. Amara didn't sleep that night. She lay staring at the ceiling of her rented apartment, replaying Seo's words like a song stuck on repeat, the kind you hate but can't turn off because some cruel part of you wants to memorize every insult just to prove you can survive it. The barren foreigner story writes itself. She'd built a life out of not caring what people assumed about her body. She'd had to. But there was a difference between armor you wore for yourself and armor that was suddenly expected to protect someone else. Someone whose empire, whose life, whose entire fragile peace could apparently unravel because of a rumor about her womb. She thought about walking away, genuinely considered it, the way you considered jumping into cold water, knowing it'll hurt, knowing it might also be the only sane option. Leaving Seoul would be easy. She had no lease that couldn't be broken, no roots deep enough to need pulling. She could disappear the way she'd disappeared from every place that had decided her worth before she'd said a single word. But then she thought of Min Jae fixing that projector, quiet and competent, never once asking her the questions everyone else always asked first. Do you have kids? Do you want kids? What happened to you? He'd never asked. Not once. He'd simply watched her be a person, and that, more than any gala, any charity check, any expensive dinner, had cracked something open in her she'd sealed shut years ago. She wasn't going to let a man like Seo or a boardroom full of men like Beck decide that cracking open had been a mistake. Minjae found her the next evening at the charity office, boxing up donor files with the brisk efficiency of a woman who needed her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander somewhere darker. You heard, he said. Not a question. I heard, Amara confirmed, not looking up. Apparently, I'm a PR problem now. Congratulations to me. First time being called a problem in a designer dress. Amara? No, let me finish. She set down the folder in her hands, finally meeting his eyes. I've spent my whole adult life being someone's inconvenient truth. Men who wanted the version of me that came with a guaranteed nursery. Families who looked at me like a defective investment. I know what it's like to be weighed and found wanting, Minjae. I don't need a translation for what your advisors are saying about me. I've heard it in every language that matters. Minjae crossed the room, close enough that she could see the exhaustion he usually kept locked behind that unreadable calm. Then let me be clear, in whatever language you need. I don't care what my counsel thinks you can or cannot give me. I care what you already have given me, which is the first honest laugh I've had in a decade, and the first silence that didn't feel like a countdown to disappointment. Amara's throat tightened. She hated how badly she wanted to believe him. Hated it the way you hate wanting water in the desert. Not because wanting is wrong, but because wanting makes the eventual absence hurt so much more. Pretty words, she said quietly. But pretty words don't stop bullets, and they definitely don't stop boardrooms. No, Minjae agreed. But I didn't build an empire on pretty words. I built it on making sure the people who threaten what's mine regret it. He paused. You are mine to protect now, Amara, whether my counsel approves or not. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. A mafia boss delivering declarations like dialogue from a drama she'd have mocked a year ago. But there was nothing funny about the way her chest ached, hearing someone finally choose her out loud. Consequences and all. You're going to regret defending me, she said, only half joking. I've regretted worse decisions for far less reason, Minjae said. At least this one, I'll enjoy. Neither of them noticed the black car idling outside the charity office, or the man inside it photographing the exchange through a long lens, cataloging evidence for a boardroom that had already decided Amara's fate before she'd finished unpacking her boxes. The summons came the way all unpleasant things came in Minjae's world, dressed politely, delivered by someone too well-mannered to be trusted. Advisor Bake requests a private audience, his assistant said, careful not to meet Amara's eyes, the way people avoid looking directly at accidents they suspect are about to happen. With you? Alone. Amara almost laughed. Of course he did. Men like Beck never fought fair when they could ambush instead, corner the woman while the man she loved was 3 floors away, negotiating shipping contracts, blissfully unaware his advisors had decided to handle his personal life like a hostile takeover. She went anyway, not because she was brave, though she was, but because she was done letting other people's meetings determine her worth without her in the room to object. Bake's office looked exactly like she'd imagined. Dark wood, expensive art, the kind of quiet that cost more than her apartment's monthly rent. He didn't offer her a seat, which told her everything about how this conversation was meant to go. Miss Amara. He said her name like it was a foreign dish he was reluctantly tasting. I'll be direct, since subtlety seems wasted on Americans. I'll try to keep up, she said, arms crossed, refusing to give him the satisfaction of flinching. You understand what you represent to this family. A foreigner, no bloodline, and he paused for maximum theatrical cruelty. Barren? Or so the whispers say. A woman incapable of giving Minjae the one thing this empire desperately requires. Funny, Amara said, voice steady despite the familiar sting. I've been called a lot of things by a lot of men who thought their opinion of my body was somehow a job requirement. You're not as original as you think, advisor. Beck's mustache twitched, the closest thing to genuine surprise she'd get out of him. He slid a folder across the desk. the same practiced motion of a man who'd clearly rehearsed this moment in a mirror. Then let me offer you something more original. Proof. Amara opened it, expecting threats, financial records, maybe surveillance photos meant to humiliate her into leaving quietly. What she found instead made her blood go cold in a completely different way. Medical records. Not hers. Kang Soo-jin, Min Jae's mother. She scanned the pages. Genetic markers, fertility specialists. A decades-old condition passed down through the Kang bloodline that made conception dangerously rare without extensive medical intervention. Complications during childbirth. A second pregnancy that had cost Soo-jin her life trying to give her husband the spare heir the family had demanded. The Kang bloodline, Baek said quietly, some of his earlier cruelty fading into something almost tired, has struggled with fertility for 3 generations. We buried it under arranged marriages and expensive discretion. It was never about you, Miss Amara. Your barrenness was simply convenient. A story easier to tell than the truth. Blame the outsider. Protect the family name. Amara stared at the papers, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not relief exactly, but a slow-burning fury finally finding its rightful target. All those years, all those whispered judgments, the men who'd walked away, the family gatherings where her worth had been quietly recalculated based on rumors about her body, and the entire architecture of that shame had been borrowed, recycled. A convenient lie dressed up as concern, designed to protect men who couldn't stomach admitting their own bloodline's fragility. You used me, she said slowly, as a scapegoat, for something that was never mine to carry. I used the easiest narrative available, Beck said, without apology, because men like him rarely offered one. You were a foreigner. No family here to defend your name. It was simply efficient. Amara closed the folder, hands steady despite the storm building behind her ribs. You picked the wrong woman to be efficient about, advisor. She walked out of that office not broken, but blazing, carrying proof that the label she'd worn like a scar for years had never been about her capability to love, to build a family, to be chosen. It had been about men too cowardly to face their own history, looking for someone easier to blame. Somewhere across the building, Min Jae was about to learn the same truth from a very different, far angrier messenger. Min Jae was reviewing shipping manifests when Amara walked into his office without knocking, a habit she'd never had before, and one that told him immediately something had shifted the ground beneath them both. She dropped the folder on his desk the way you drop a live grenade you no longer wanted to hold. Your advisor thinks he's clever, she said. Turns out he's just desperate. Min Jae opened the folder and watched his own mother's medical history spill across his desk like a secret his family had spent decades burying under silk and silence. He went very still, the particular stillness of a man discovering that grief he thought he understood had only ever been shown to him in fragments. He told you this, Min Jae said quietly. Not a question. He told me this, thinking it would send me running, thinking I'd hear convenient scapegoat and quietly disappear. Grateful he'd bothered to explain why my life got picked apart in boardrooms I was never invited into. Amara's voice didn't shake, though something underneath it clearly wanted to. Instead, I learned your family's been running the same lie for 3 generations, Min Jae. Blaming outsiders, blaming women, blaming anyone but the truth, staring them in the face. Min Jae read the pages slowly, jaw tightening with every line. His mother's fertility struggles, the second pregnancy she'd been pressured into against medical advice, the quiet, expensive miracles his father's advisors had orchestrated to protect a bloodline that had always been fragile, dressed up in a mythology of strength that was, in the end, mostly performance. They let me believe she died from complications, he said, voice low. Not that she died being forced to try again for a spare heir nobody actually needed. Sounds familiar, Amara said, not unkindly. Men deciding a woman's worth by what her body can produce. Guess your family's had a type for a while. Min Jae looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the composed, unshakable boss dissolved into something rawer. Grief, fury, and underneath it, a dangerous clarity settling into place like a blade finally finding its target. He stood, folder in hand, and walked straight past her toward the door. Min Jae, I'm done letting Beck write my family's history, he said. It's time he answered for the chapters he's been hiding. The boardroom went silent when Min-jae entered. Folders slapped onto the table hard enough to make two advisors flinch. "Explain this," he said, voice low in the way that had once made grown men reconsider entire business ventures. Baek's composure cracked for the first time in the meeting's history. "Min-jae Nim, that information was sealed for a reason. For whose protection?" Min-jae's voice rose, sharp enough to cut through decades of practiced boardroom calm. "My mother's memory? Or this council's comfortable mythology that the Kang bloodline is invincible? So long as we keep finding foreign women to blame for our own fragility?" The other advisors shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their folded hands. "You built a story," Min-jae continued, "out of my mother's death, and aimed it at a woman who has done nothing but survive every unfair thing men like you have thrown at her. You call her a liability. I call her the only person in this room who's told me the truth without expecting anything from me in return." Baek's mouth opened, then closed. For once, the old man had no folder, no rehearsed retort, no smug proof to slide across the table. "I am marrying Amara," Min-jae said, each word landing like a verdict. "Not because the Empire requires an heir, because I require her. If that costs us rivals, we'll handle rivals the way we always have, directly. But I will not sacrifice her to protect a lie this family has been telling itself since before I was born." The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the particular quiet before a storm decides which direction to break. Word traveled fast in Seoul's underworld, faster even than Baek's carefully cultivated rumors. Within days, whispers of Min-jae's declaration reached the ears of every rival house circling his empire like patient vultures, each one recalculating the odds of war now that the weak airline story had lost its teeth. The first to test the waters was a lieutenant from the Seo family, the same smug crocodile who'd cornered Amara at the gala, mistaking cruelty for cleverness. He arrived at Min-jae's penthouse uninvited, flanked by two men who clearly believed intimidation was still a currency worth spending. "You've made yourself vulnerable, Min-jae Nim," the lieutenant said, spreading his hands like he was offering mercy instead of threats. "A woman with no bloodline, no family, no proven fertility. Our houses were prepared to respect a strong Kang empire. This," he gestured vaguely, as if Amara's existence were an inconvenient weather pattern, "is not strength." Min-jae didn't rise from his chair. He didn't need to. "You mistake affection for weakness because you've never had anything worth protecting beyond your own ambition," he said calmly. "Let me be clear, since apparently rumors travel faster than facts in your circles. Amara is not my liability. She's the reason I finally understand what I've spent a decade protecting an empire for." "Sentiment?" the lieutenant scoffed. "Doesn't win wars." "No," Min-jae agreed, standing now, voice dropping into the register that had once made rival syndicates reconsider entire campaigns. "But I do. And unlike your house, I don't need a woman's womb to secure my legacy. I have contracts, alliances, and men loyal enough to remind your family exactly why no one has successfully moved against the Kang name in 30 years. Test me again, and you'll learn that lesson personally." The lieutenant left without another word, the kind of retreat that, in Min-jae's world, counted as a resounding victory. Baek, to his credit, did not vanish quietly into disgraced irrelevance. He arrived at Amara's office 3 days later, without an appointment, without his usual smugness, carrying instead something that looked suspiciously like humility, an expression his face seemed entirely unpracticed in making. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly, the words clearly costing him more than any boardroom negotiation ever had. "I used your reputation to protect a truth I was too proud to face myself. That was cowardice, dressed up as strategy." Amara studied him for a long moment. She could have made him suffer for it, could have savored watching a man who'd built his cruelty on other people's shame finally choke on his own. Instead, she found she didn't want that kind of victory. "You don't get my forgiveness just because you found some dignity, advisor," she said evenly. "But I'll accept the truth, since it's more than you've ever offered me before. What you do with the rest of your guilt is your business." Baek nodded, something almost respectful passing behind his eyes. "Min-jae chose well," he admitted, before turning to leave. "Better than any bloodline chart ever could have shown us." The wedding, when it came, was smaller than Seoul's elite expected and louder in meaning than any of them anticipated. No arranged spectacle, no eligible daughters paraded for approval, just Min Jae, steady and unshakable, and Amara, radiant in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years, finally standing in a room where no one whispered the word barren like an accusation. "You once told me you were still deciding what you wanted," Amara murmured to him as they stood before their small gathering of trusted allies, Han River glittering behind them like it had been waiting all along for this exact moment. "I decided a long time ago," Minjae said. "I was just waiting for the world to catch up." She laughed, the real laugh, unguarded, the one she used to ration like her last match in a storm. Now she spent it freely, knowing there'd always be more where that came from. Whatever the future held, heirs or no heirs, empires or ashes, Amara had already won the only inheritance that mattered, a life where her worth was never up for debate, and a love that had chosen her not, despite the label the world tried to brand her with, but completely apart from it. Some empires are built on bloodlines. Theirs was built on something far harder to destroy: the simple, radical decision to choose each other. Consequences be damned. Reflection for the comments. Do you believe real love is built on bloodlines and expectations, or on two people brave enough to choose each other despite everyone telling them not to? Tell us below. And hit subscribe if you believe love should never be measured by what a person can produce, only by what it can heal. Only the Becks of the world will scroll past without smashing that button. Thank you for reading till the end.